the basics of exam technique. Now, remember, these are just the fundamentals. We will be elaborating on these much more in the course to come, but this is just to make sure that any big gaps are filled in with your exam technique so that you're not left stranded until you learn those techniques, maybe a month from now. So these are the fundamentals, get used to them and get competent at them, and then later on we will be upgrading and replacing them as part of the system. But there are a few things that you need to make sure you do when you are sitting an exam or the immediate preparation before the exam to ensure you have the optimum performance possible and give yourself the best chance of getting a high result. And one of those things is sleep. So you have to get sufficient sleep before the day of a test or an exam. And the reason is purely because there is something called sleep-dependent memory consolidation, which we talk about later in the course as well. But long story short, it means that you will not be able to use the information you studied until you actually go into a deeper level of sleep where it's taken to higher level cortices, and then you can use that for your test and exam. So it means that all the time you spend learning material may actually be in your brain, locked, unable to be used, which is obviously a huge shame and a waste of time. So if you're gonna cram beforehand. If you're gonna do all-nighters, do them beforehand, but at least the day before your exam or test, make sure that you're getting sufficient sleep, more than enough sleep. Be conservative about it. The additional sleep is going to help you perform better. And also, sleep is also related to your level of cognitive functioning and executive processing, which includes problem solving. So if you're sleep deprived, you can get up to a 10 to 20 point IQ drop due to sleep deprivation. So the last thing you want when you're walking into an exam is to not only be unable to use the information that you studied, but also to be literally dumber and less able to solve problems or answer the questions in the exam. So sleep is one really major one. And another thing that is very common and a lot of students will ask about is the idea of double checking and the system behind, should I check the answer? Should I change my answer? What should I do? So there's a few different schools of thought around this, and some of the older research and a lot of the common understanding of it was that you shouldn't change your answer if you were to double check it. So it was against double checking. However, some more recent research that's coming out suggests that actually that may not be so true and that double checking can actually make you change to a better answer. The system that I use and the one that I generally recommend for most students is to do what I call priority checking, which is very simple. It just means when you're answering the question, try to go at a pace where you have a little bit of time left over at the end of your test or exam to go through and check some of your questions, but keep your pace relatively consistent. So for example, if you have 10 questions and you're spending 1 minute per question, then don't spend 5 minutes on one question, because if within that first minute you weren't able to figure out what the right answer is, there's a chance that you could just be tunneling in further and further, and it's actually getting more and more confusing for you, and you might exit the exam and 20 minutes later think, oh man, the answer was so obvious, when you bring yourself out of that tunnel vision. And that's a very dangerous place to be in. And I think we all know what that tunnel vision actually feels like. So the system that I use, and that's is one that I've developed throughout the many thousands of questions that I've answered through the many exams that I've had over the years, is to keep a pace that allows me to get through each question comfortably, being relatively sure about the answer for each question. But at the end of the exam, I still have time left to go back and revise the questions that I didn't feel so confident on. And the ones I didn't feel so confident on are the ones that I needed to spend longer on. So let's say if I'm trying to do one question every 30 seconds and there's a certain question that I've already spent a minute on, I'm going to give my best possible answer. I'm going to leave a little star or something next to it. And then at the end, I'll come back to see if I'm able to answer it. And often just taking that time away from the question and coming back to it at the end just opens up your mind a little bit more. And when you look at it again, you think, oh, actually, I'm able to think about this a little bit differently. There may have been a question 20 questions later that allows you to understand that first question a little bit more easily. And so overall, maintaining pace means you're likely to cover all the questions properly, but because you are keeping a list of priorities of which questions that you want to come back to when you do get the chance, you're giving yourself the chance to change the answer for some of those that you did feel weak on without wasting too much time and increasing the risk of changing correct answers into incorrect ones. Because if you felt pretty certain the first time you answered it, chances are that when you look at it, you're going to be changing to a wrong one after that. So we use a little bit of a combination, and I just call this priority checking. Maybe it's already got a different name for it, and if you do, you can let me know, but this is a system that tends to work pretty well. And then the third thing that we can do for exam execution is just in the immediate preparation before the exam is trying to get inside the mind of the examiner and try to prepare for your exam in the way that you think the examiner would test you. And so this is quite different from doing just practice questions. When you do practice questions, you rely on questions that already exist to help you answer different types of content. When I say think like an examiner, what I want you to do is take the information that you know, and I want you to think, if I were to make a really challenging exam or assessment, if I wanted to throw some curveballs to these students, how would I do that? And what that will actually do, it may feel like a subtle change, but it puts your mind in the perspective of someone who is using the information in a way that you know you may not be applying that information. So you may know that you're really good at answering questions that are like A, B, or C. But because you're deliberately looking for the way that they might test you, that you don't know about, you will open yourself to thinking about type number D. And that could be the type of question that they throw as a curveball. And it's an excellent revision strategy to use. Even when you learn the advanced strategies later on, you should still keep doing this. Put yourself in the mind of an examiner. Think, how can I really challenge my knowledge? How would I really trick students out by using this information? Create some questions for yourself. Maybe create questions for if you've got a study group between your friends. Make maybe a list of 40 or 50 different questions about a specific subject and give them to your friends and swap them. And use that as a way of challenging your learning. You'll actually find that not only can it be more effective than past papers, yes, it can actually be more effective than past papers, but also trains your brain to think about the information from the instructor's point of view, which makes it easier to study in the future because you're starting to think about information from multiple different angles, and it makes it easier to understand some of the more difficult concepts. And it's also a technique that you can use through university. A lot of university papers, you don't have access to that many past paper questions, or they change their style of questioning very often. And so relying on past papers is actually not a good idea for a lot of university papers. Not all, but a lot of them. And so being able to do this very comfortably because you've practiced it throughout high school is going to be a really great weapon in your arsenal that you can carry in through university. So that was number 3. And then number 4 is actually just a very simple technique that we can use in an exam. I was always the type of student that got really nervous in an exam, and I would feel myself tunneling in a lot. I hyped it up too much for myself in my mind. And one thing that you can actually do in this situation is simply take long, slow, deep breaths. And this may sound very hippie and not what you're expecting, but there's actually a very physiological reason why this works. And the reason is because there is a nerve that's connected to your diaphragm, which is the muscle that's used to help you breathe. When you take a slow, deep breath, it actually forces your diaphragm to contract, which activates a certain nerve that's connected to it. And that nerve directly invokes what's called the parasympathetic response. And the parasympathetic response is otherwise known as the rest and digest system. It's the opposite of the sympathetic response, which is the fight or flight. So when you're feeling anxious, what's normally happening is that your brain is sensing danger, and that danger is in the form of an exam. Not like some kind of predatory lion or something in the bushes, but it's in the form of an exam, and your brain is sensing real danger, even though there isn't real danger. Well, I mean, I guess you could argue that point, but there isn't something that's life-threatening. Well, I guess you could argue that point as well. But anyway, it's not a lion, it's not going to kill you. So your brain is sensing this danger, and now from your point of view, you need to calm your brain down, and it's very hard to do it because it's a biological response that's activating the sympathetic fight or flight response. Deep breaths forcibly deactivate the fight or flight response, and in fact, if you're feeling really anxious, when you take slow deep breaths, it's almost impossible not to calm down. Now, when you stop taking deep breaths, you may actually end up working yourself up again. But it stops you from going into that spiral. It gives you a bit of, well, breathing room to just relax a little bit, get a bit more comfortable with the environment, get a bit more comfortable with where you're sitting, look around you, get out of your own headspace a little bit, and it gives you the mental freedom to just relax a little bit and open your mind, because that also is going to allow you to be more creative and a better problem solver, because your brain is less tunneled in. You're actually going to perform better in the exam. Like I said before, when you leave an exam and you think, man, I knew the answer to that, why couldn't I think of that? A lot of that is due to the fact that you are in this tunnel vision, and that can be driven by anxiety. I know that for myself it was, and it was really a big problem for me while I was going through high school. I only really got a handle on it while I was in my mid to later years of university, and even still it will affect me. And this is a technique that I consistently will still use, and you can actually use this for any time you're feeling anxious, but in the context of an exam, obviously very, very relevant. So have a little bit of a breathing routine, maybe 10 seconds of very slow, deep breathing, especially the exhale going out really, really slowly, really, really deep. And if you feel yourself trying to breathe a little bit faster, you just force it down. You force your breathing to a slow until you feel yourself calming down a little bit more. You give yourself that little bit of mental space. You sit back a little bit, and then you can re-engage with the task at hand at maximum focus with a calm, clear, and confident mind, so you can get the results that you worked so hard and deserve.